that's just a gauge of 3. So, and then I'll use the powder, slightly kibbled, which is all right. That's fine. So, so I've got 3 aggregates. So one quicklime. And in this case, straight away, mix the 2 together. So we don't need to go through that phase of breaking the lumps down on their own. We just mix the 2 together. And our sands tend to be wetter than this when we use. I mean, I know masons are more meticulous in North America about using dry sand, but in the UK we very rarely do. It's got a certain amount of moisture, usually about 3%, 4% content. But in this process, in that case, when you use the powder, the slate starts immediately. It's just starting now. I can feel warmth there. So it's just with the moisture that is in the sand. And we actually, because this is the method we evolved when we didn't know what we were doing, really. But it worked very well. And we would let that go on for a while, and it starts to become very lively. You get little volcanic eruptions and so on, and can reach about 180 degrees centigrade. But there's not much water in there, so I'm just going to add a little bit to encourage that along, and it doesn't have to be much. But and there seems to be a consensus that if you can do it this way, I mean, Pasley says that it was the norm in 1826 to pulverize hydraulic quicklime, because hydraulic quicklime can be notoriously slow to slake. I mean, we could do what we did a minute ago there, and we might, depending on the hydraulicity of it, it might not do what it did until tomorrow. And suddenly it'll do it. So they pulverized it, which helped speed the slake. And then, so when you read this, where they say, oh, a lot they do the quicklime, they mound it over with sand, put a hose pipe in the top, which I've heard we're doing in living memory. They go home then and come back the next morning, but almost that's using a feebly hydraulic or a hydraulic lime when they're doing that, because they're just wasting their time hanging around waiting for it to slake. So now you can see that's getting a bit more lively, just a bit. It's not much, but that's getting quite hot now. I'm not sure I'd want to put my hand in there at the moment, but so I mean it's safe to put your hand on it actually, but it's pretty hot. And if you use totally powdered, which we do, that will happen instantaneously. So it's getting really hot. And if I leave this to go on, I'm tempted, but it will give you a bit of dust in your direction, and it's not necessary. That's the thing. But it's I've got a conservator that I encounter him quite a lot, and he loves the phrase pyroclastic flow, which I take the mickey out of him for using that word, but actually that's what happens. It becomes a superfine dust, and when you drag it flows like water. It just changes quite dramatically and becomes quite lively, but not explosive. It never would explode. That's the key thing that putty lime, when you're making it by throwing it in, that can explode if you're not careful. If you don't keep stirring it and you get a build up. There's no way this can happen with a hot mix. That's why I say it's safer than that, because the sand mitigates that potential. You've got the sand there. But on this front, as far as this method of mixing, and indeed the other, when we were in Spain and these lime burners showed up, these great big men, and to be fair, their lime kiln wasn't working, but the son of one of them, who was dead, was a filmmaker, and he was making a movie. You can find it online, where they reformed the kiln and they loaded it and everything else, and involved all the school kids in the village and things. It's in Valencia province, and it's great. It's a great little film. It's only 2 5-minute ones, and he hasn't put up where they actually burn it yet. But anyway, the guy, the son, was just, he knew it all. He thought he did, and he came in, and we just started a ordinary method hot mix, and we were using this lovely quicklime from Andalusia that's still being made, and he came in straight, oh, that's wrong, and he started shuffling the lumps of lime like a few millimeters and the lime burners were going like that. And anyway, but I started the hot mix, and at that time I was still putting a little bit too little in when I did. So fair dues, the guy said, that's not enough water, and he was absolutely right, but at the time I didn't know that, because I was still thinking it was great to get it really hot. So there is a point to this story anyway. So, but one of the lime burners was stood right next to me, and and it was getting a bit tense actually, because this know-it-all guy who wasn't a lime burner was trying to show off, and all the organisers were stood behind saying, just ignore him, they were saying. But anyway, and this guy, the lime burner, he had a very big fat belly, and I just put my hand on his belly and I said, look, you're the expert here. And he said, and straight away he said, oh no. I said, I'm just a stonemason, you're the expert. And he just, oh no, he said, you're the expert, you're the stonemason. And that kind of diffused it. But then we proceeded, and he just said to me quietly, the lime burner, he said, I wouldn't do it like that. I would slake the lime on its own first, not in the sand. And I said, yeah, but would you then mix it when it's really, oh, of course I'd do that, yes. But just he said that was easier. But then I went through with the hot mix and I mixed the two together, obviously, and continued the slake. And then he just said to me very quietly at the end, he said, oh, I see. Oh, if you make it that way, you get a much stronger mortar. So that was kind of, so this is and that's what we see in the text as well. This somehow gives you an even better mortar than the one we just made, which is pretty bloody good. So, you know, but anyway. So I'm going to start now putting the water in more. It's consumed that little bit extra I put in, but I'll just put a little bit more and get this going. But as I say, it is pretty hot now, and just be careful of this dust, although most of it is steam, I should say. But the same principle applies. I could now just put in the volume of water that it needs straight away. So if the dust concerns you, other than in this moment, I mean on site or whatever, that's the way to do it. So in the mixer these days we do that. We put in a full bucket of water and then the gentle feed. So the dust is not an essential part of the equation. So I'll just get a bit more in and then. But it's important that you don't put too much water in, because we do need it to reach that minimum temperature at this moment. That's critical. So, and in a minute we'll have a bit of fun and we'll make some pussy lime in the traditional way. That is a bit lively. So again, just gradually, incrementally, as Dossie says in 1771, and I like that, finding that description was great, because you might have noticed, he says do it on a small scale with a trowel in a small container, and it's exactly what we've done in our ignorance, and there we got a lovely description of it. But this is nice lime. See, that's hot. I think, that's burning me. I mean, I can feel it. So again, I just take it off. I mean, I'm very naughty. I should have gloves on, I know, but I'm partly on a mission to demonstrate to you that assertions that this is a really dangerous activity are somewhat over-egged. Put it that way, you know. So as far as the mixing time and all of that, I think you might agree that it's as quick as making a cement mortar or a hydraulic lime mortar. I mean, there's no, in fact, the rule is that you should leave the hydraulic limes and the cements mixing for 20 minutes after you've made them, whereas it doesn't apply to this. As soon as this is to a mortar, you can have it out of the mixer and you can use it. So in that sense, it's quicker. We've had a few cases in the UK where a job has been won on the basis of using NHL, and then CADU or Historic England said, well, would you, to the contractor and the architects, would you use hot mix instead? They said, oh yeah, we'll do that, but it'll cost you £14,000 more. And so we think, oh really? I mean, when you break it down, the quick lime is a third of the price of NHL. The mixing time is as quick, the aftercare is less, and so on and so forth. So it should be cheaper. But I mean, we're going to get people chancing their arms, aren't we? And as some of the old established suppliers are starting to make the premixes, they're charging ridiculous amounts of money for it. But anyway, so at the end of the day, it's always better to make your own if you can. But the premix industry is growing in the UK, and all those line suppliers that have switched to it tell me they can't keep up with the demand, and actually Tarmac, one of the biggest producers of quicklime, their main kiln, their big Mertz kiln, is out of action. So we've kind of generated a national shortage of quicklime at the moment because they can't keep up with the demand. So, anyway, but we've got in our town and other towns increasingly, ordinary builders merchants are now stocking quicklime as a stock item, and that's great. So, you know, and I used to, I don't know, when I was in Vermont years ago, we did use quicklime, but not, we were using it for the hot lime washes actually. I can't remember why we knew that, but we didn't know the rest. But anyway, and I was buying it, you could just go into the lime works at North Adams in Massachusetts and you get dolomitic or high calcium lime just off the shelf. I'm told that's changed, but you know. But of course, Mario is going to be supplying loads of premixes very soon. Okay, so that's, yeah, well, we can take that to whatever water content we like, but again, you'll see that's a big advantage. We're in control of the water content. We're not reliant on the stiffness or otherwise of the putty lime. If we try and mix it, you know, it could be any kind of wetness. And so we've got, again, a very similar mortar to the one we just made. You know, nice and sticky, nice and adhesive, with no visible water, and all the same characteristics. And I don't know, one of the sands that we do know that gives a very feeble reaction, I'd call it a pseudo hydraulic reaction, but is granitic sand. That is a sand that will give a stronger mortar, again because of the hot mix process. And any sands that have got clay in them, we get a pozzolanic reaction, even though it's not fired clay, you know, just, or if it was fired millions of years ago, or whatever you want. But so, you know, these are all options. That's the thing. There are infinite variation of mortars. We've got, I normally have, obviously I couldn't bring them over here, but I have a box of samples that I, in my sad kit way, pass around. But one of the best ones, in terms of showing you what you can achieve with a hot mix and an air lime, is one where the masons at Crowland Abbey were working, and they phoned me up and they said, we're making a mortar at the bottom of the church tower. By the time we get to the top of the church tower, it's set hard in the bucket. And I think, well, what the hell are you putting in it? But actually, the key ingredient was 1/6 part of slate dust, which, again, around here, very easy to get that from Vermont. And research I've subsequently read, microsilica is considered to be the most efficient pozzolan, the most reactive pozzolan, which of course slate is microsilica, slate dust. So that was giving them a mortar that was setting within half an hour, not obviously fully set, but beyond a mortar. So these are all the options that exist, and the calcium china clay, which I know Omnia sell around here, Mesostar, or it's been called various things over the years, Argical, there's all sorts of names for it. That is also a very powerful pozzolan. I mean, so you've got to be careful not to put too much of that in. Really, you're looking at probably no more than 5% in a building in the air, but that will hasten the set, and you'll get a good reaction from that. So, so yeah, that's the other method, and this is the one we tend to use the most. But if we're building these days, we would actually use lump. But pointing, we tend to use that because there is really no risk of late slaking, and that's only a commercial worry. And the same with plastering. We would tend to mix this, and we could use this hot without any fear of late slaking, or we'd certainly use it the next day when this becomes slightly less tacky and a little bit more elastic, but no less cohesive and no less adhesive. So, you know, these are all options and variations. One thing I would say that in plastering, if you use it hot, you get less shrinkage, get less initial shrinkage. And I don't want to pretend that with any of these mortars, you won't get some shrinkage when you use them. You will. You can, actually some don't. If you're really meticulous about your aggregates and grading and everything else, you can get a mortar that will shrink very little. But again, changing the culture of, you know, that's known. That was the, in my opinion, that's the price they were prepared to pay for having the right volume of free lime in it to make the mortar work. But of course, you just close it down the next day and knock it back, and it shouldn't happen again. The one mistake that masons and people have been making in the UK is once this mortar goes into the wall and we wet a bit, but nothing like as much as I used to when I used hydraulics or even putty lines, we'll wet the background a bit, and in the winter we're talking a little splash with a brush, that's it, and then we put the mortar in and then we don't wet it again. But because they've got used to hydraulic lines, they keep wetting it. And so I was getting phone calls saying it's shrinking. I say, well, yeah, it'll shrink overnight. Yeah, but it's shrinking the next day and the next day. And then it suddenly dawned on me. I said, are you wetting it every day? Yes. So what you're doing then, of course, you're just constantly taking the water content back to the level it was when you made the mortar, which is why it shrank. So you just keep making it shrink. And with this material, uniquely again, we won't put any more water in it once it's in the wall, except maybe a few weeks later we'll give it a spray. We actually want the water out as quickly as possible without it coming out too fast. And the water retentivity of this is a new word I learned from Boynton and Gutschick. It means that it doesn't tend to come out too fast, but in the first instance it'll lose quite a lot, which allows you to use with brickwork or whatever. You can knock it back usually the same day, give it the first aftercare, and then maybe again the next day. But you can usually go, and unless the wall is very wet when you start because of various problems it's had, then they will reach an initial set within 24 hours typically, and then within a few days carbonation will start on the face, and you'll get a case hardened face, which from my point of view is the time I feel I can walk away. Because that's going to protect the rest from drying out too fast and so on. So in that sense the aftercare is much less with these. The only time I cover the work these days is if I'm pointing on a Friday and I know I can't be back till Monday. It's actually to keep it going longer. It's a convenience thing, it's not a necessity. So that's another aspect of these mortars, which is a big convenience for the mason and an economic advantage too. So you just add all these up, we're building up to really quite a big economic benefit in using these mortars. Leaving aside all the sustainability issues and the embodied energy for transporting it from France or wherever, and all these things, or from Portugal and stuff. So yeah. Oh, I thought my trail was the other way up then. I thought it was my trail, it was the mortar. Anyway, so
by weight, you've got a lot more lime in this mix than that mix, right?
I wouldn't have said so. No, I know when
because the powder, there's less air in the measure.
Yes, but I mounded it at the gauge when it's lump. Okay. You kind of they talk about a struck. There's a struck level, a struck measure, and a fair level. So if you're gauging with lump, you would mound it up more. And equally, when you've made it, because you get to know what it needs, what it should feel like, and if it doesn't, then an example of that, we were working in the winter this year in January, and it had been -10 overnight, and I'd read in some of the old texts that in the winter they would put more lime in, and I thought, well, that's to make it more frost durable. That was what I thought when I read that. But we were mixing, and the quick lime had been in my truck overnight, so the temperatures had gone down to -10, and we were mixing. It was still frozen the ground, but we knew it was going to warm up in the next 2 days. So I mixed in the normal way with the normal gauge, and it just felt short. And so I just put in another trowel of quicklime, and then it felt right. And that's really because it was so cold to start with, it wasn't reaching the temperature soon enough, which is why it felt short. So that's, I would say, why they might put a bit more in the winter. Nothing to do with durability, it's just to make it feel right, or to match their expectation of how it should feel to be right. And that's, again, what I said earlier, that's the standard. You know, I know we like other standards, but in the masonry world, that was the standard, to make it feel right. So if one of the criticisms in London, for instance, if they're bringing the lime from Kent on the river, you'd get some of it with air slake on the way, and then you read criticism that then it was tipped on the quayside in London and might stay there for a few days, so that by the time it got to site, perhaps even 50% of it might have air slaked. And so when you then mix that in the normal way, it's short. And we do see these very lime-rich mortars in London. But some of that is probably already slaked, which is why they've put more in to make it feel right. And that's what the architects like Lazel and others just could not abide, that they relied on people like me to know when it felt right and to adjust the mortar. It couldn't be specified in a very exact way. That's what they. You might have read the Lazar when he lists out the advantages of hydrated lime, but the main one was that he no longer had to rely on the skill or the expertise of masons. He could just specify one of these, one of them, one of that. So I'm not criticising. Yeah, but that seems to be the truth of the matter, you know, and that was onerous to some professionals, that they relied on you know, charlatans like me to make the right mortar rather than being able to just design it. Yeah.
So question to you then, how long would it need to set before it's exposed to deep freezing temperature like minus 35 or 25?
I cannot answer that because we never get temperatures that cold.
Okay.
That's all I can say. That's for you to find out.
Well, maybe the most logic would be to do our work during summertime,
Yeah,
but it doesn't
no,
happen.
obviously, yeah, and I think that would be more the case. I mean, my impression is in the UK, even though it was much colder in the UK historically, you know, the Thames used to freeze and all that sort of thing in the 18th century. But I go through a lot of building accounts. That's my latest endeavour, sort of raw building accounts, which tells you exactly what they use, and that they're very useful. But you don't, and you also get time of year from those. In our village, I've been through all the building accounts, or the labour accounts, and every so often it says, in January, it says too cold for the masons to work, but it doesn't say it in February or December, and so my impression is that most of the year they're working, unless it's really cold, when they'll stop. But again, in the winter we would tend to put it in hot, and we'll see what this is like tomorrow. So we've got the evaporation that it's stiffening down, it's losing that excess of water. Our impression is that certainly in our climate, when it might be minus 10, minus 15 overnight, that it's not frost vulnerable, put it that way.
I think it's important to distinguish between what you're using it for in that context. I mean, if you're using it as a bedding mortar in your core, then it's going to, you can use it in, I mean, we've used it in situations when we're well into the minuses.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
pointing.
Yeah.
And using it hot.
I mean, one of the structural engineers that is specifying this a lot on cathedrals all over the country, his rule is you shouldn't use it if the temperature is lower than 3 degrees centigrade and the mortar is less than 4 degrees centigrade when you put it in. That's his rule. I don't know where he's probably conjured that up. It actually sounds quite a nice rule in a way. We'll put it in, if the ground is frozen and it's frozen, I will use it if I know it's going to be above freezing the next day and for a few. And usually we're able to do that in the UK. We're not going to get, it's rare that we get 2 solid weeks of frozen weather. So I time the work. I'm happy to put it in if it's frozen, but knowing that it's going to get warm. And if I've got a week for this to lose moisture and to start setting, that's usually enough. I've never lost anything to frost, put it that way, in working through the winter. Beyond that, and I'm not suggesting this is a good thing in any way, Emma and I are testing a wall in our yard where since October she'll build a bit every so often with just a straight airline like this and not cover the top. I mean, that's essential. If you're working with this, you must not let rainwater get into the top of the wall. That will cause major frost damage, unquestionably. So cover it. I mean, we see that in the old text, that's about all they ever say. Cover the wall with a plank. They say you've got to protect it. Put a plank on top of the wall, and but that's to stop rain getting in to the top. But where so we've left that wall and we pointed it, some of it, in January, and in later in January we did get a cold spell, and the pointing froze solid. It was frozen solid on the wall, and I thought, well, that's that then. But when it thawed, I'd lost a millimetre of it. It delaminated about a millimetre. I brushed that off and I knocked it back, and I still thought that's going to be no good. But now, a year on, that has set perfectly fine. So again, that's to do with this pore structure. These pores that the water doesn't want to sit in, and nor does it likes bigger pores where it can sit and freeze. So you will know if you use NHL. In that scenario, you will have lost that to full depth if it freezes. It doesn't seem to be the case with the hot mixes. I'm not recommending it, but again, they're different. They behave differently in those situations, those stress situations. But again, in the winter, you might put in a porcelain, you know, to just speed that, to get them beyond the reach of the frost. I mean, one thing we do have a lot in the UK, we have a lot of moisture. I don't know about here, but when it's very cold in North America, generally, I think the air is quite dry, which is good. You know, that helps frost protection.
But then again, because we're heating our enclosure where we're working, so we're keeping above temperature, decent temperature for the mortar installation for 7 days,
Right.
keeping it for another 14 days after.
In my experience, that would be enough. I mean,
Okay.
we've pointed walls when it's been -10 the same evening, you know, that, and we've lost nothing. So that's all I can say. That's my experience. You just need to test this, but if you're using heated scaffolds, I would personally have no great concern that I would lose it. As long as it gets a week or two to move towards setting and let go a lot of its water, it should be fine. But you'll need to experiment.
We need to test.
Yeah, you need to test. Yeah. But don't be afraid. Don't assume that it won't work. Is what I'm saying. You know, and I think in places like Alberta, where it's very dry air, isn't it? I mean, when we did we did a 3-day workshop in Valencia, Pat McAfee and I a few years ago, and the relative humidity, it was February, but the relative humidity was 27%. We never get that low of relative humidity in the UK. And these mortars, we were putting on a plaster coat for one day, the next day, it was ready for the next one. It had become more than leather hard, just because of that low humidity. So that can make a big difference. And as anyone who works with lime, you know, you need to be a weather watcher, because you can, the damp air, it'll be slower. You know, it's fairly clear. But dry air, it'll move quite quickly towards frost resilience, I would say. So, you know, and you see that is now lost. I mean, I'd need to put a little bit more water in probably to use that, and that's just from letting go of the heat. So it gives you some idea how it's losing that heat. And in a porous substrate, you know, porous bricks, there's also a little bit, but again, the water retentivity means that the brick won't suck all the water out of it like it will out of a harsh mortar with low raw water retentivity. It'll take a little bit, but not much. It doesn't want to let it go. It's very greedy with its water. It likes to hold it tight and keep it close. And that's a great benefit, again. But it does take enough that, again, you can often knock it back the same day. And the question was asked earlier about non-porous stones. Again, that tends to happen there too. You know, you get a very good bond with a non-porous stone, and especially if you use it hot. So, okay. Do we want to do anything else? I can make a putty lime in the old way, it's a double demonstration, because I can make a putty lime, and then I can make a lime wash. So, two for the price of one. So we need to